Good morning, fifth graders. It's Ms. Jagodnik here with your new math lesson. And this is exciting. We're in chapter 17 now, which is, you may have noticed, is a little bit different. This is about stepping up to sixth grade. So each lesson is trying to get you familiar with an idea that maybe you haven't learned yet, but is going to be really important when you enter middle school, so that when you do get into sixth grade math, it won't be the first time you're seeing it, and you'll have a chance to really deepen your knowledge and do really well with it. So yesterday, Ms. Singh introduced you to the idea of integers, which is really a fancy way of saying not just regular numbers that we've always used, but positive numbers and negative numbers. So I've put up here a copy of the number line just so we can continue to practice that idea. This is really the best tool to use to understand that. So when I'm talking about that whole set of integers, this is what we've always called the whole numbers over here, just our regular numbers that we count with, not the fractions and not the decimals that are in between. But all those numbers we've always counted with are positive numbers. Even though we don't have that plus sign in front of them, that just means they're positive numbers. Once we get to 0 on this number line, that's usually where we start. But now we're introducing the idea that there are imaginary numbers that go behind 0. And they are referred to as negative numbers or negative integers. You'll always know when a number is negative because it has that negative, that minus sign in front of it. And what that really means is it is less than 0. So if you look at the number line with 0 not as the beginning anymore, with 0 as the middle, you can see that the negative numbers count in the other direction, the same way the positive numbers count here. So every number on the positive side has an opposite on the negative side. So when the question asks you for an opposite, that's what it means. Positive 1 means I've started at 0 and taken one step forward. Negative 1 means I've started at 0 and taken one step backwards. So they're the same distance from 0. They're 1 unit from 0, but they're on the opposite side. That's all opposite means. So today we're working on not just looking at these numbers and naming their opposites like you did yesterday, but using that information to compare these numbers and to order them. So I've written up here the important information you need to remember. The further left you go, the smaller a number is. And the further right you go, the bigger a number is. That has always been true, except that before, the furthest left you could go was 0. Now you can go further than that. The only reason this is tricky is that, let's say, for example, I have a number like -9 or -10. Hey, that looks like it's a big number because it's 9 or 10. It looks like it would be bigger than something like 1 or 2, but it's not because it's -9 or 10, which means I am taking 9 or 10 steps backwards. That's more than just taking 2 or 3 steps backwards. So we need to make sure that we're looking at that number line and reminding ourselves, even though the number part might look big, if it's negative, that actually means the number is smaller because it's taking more and more steps away from 0. Okay. So let's look at how this works. Number 1 asks me to think about in the guided practice. Is -7 to the left or right of -2? And what does that tell you about its value? So using what we just said, -7 is right here. -2 is right here. Is -7 to the left or to the right? It is to the left. Okay. So it is to the left. And what does that mean about its value? The further to the left you go, it is less. So -7 is less than -2. Okay. Left, less. Okay. Because what this really means is if I'm starting at 0, I'm taking 2 steps backwards to get to -2. I have to take 7 steps backwards to get to -7. That means that it is further backwards, so it is smaller than -2. Okay, going on to number 2. Now it asks you to not think of a regular number, but just to use the variable and think about a rule or a generalization I could use. If positive integer a is greater than positive integer b, is the opposite of a greater than or less than the opposite of B. So they want us to use these variables, but I like to, it's kind of confusing to think about it that way, so I like to get an example. So let's just pick some numbers for A and B. Let's say I said A is 5, because that's like the best number in the world, and B is, it's got to be something that is less, because A is greater than B. So B is 3. Okay, so let's say that A is 5 and B is 3. 5 is greater than 3. They want to know, what can I say about the opposites? So the opposite of A, the opposite of 5, the opposite of going 5 steps forward is 5 steps backwards. So that's -5. And the opposite of B, the opposite of 3, opposite of going 3 steps forward is going 3 steps backwards. So it's -3. So they want to know about -5 and -3. So is -5 greater than or less than -3? Well, here's -5, here's -3. -5 is to the left, so -5 is smaller. Okay, so I'm going to say the opposite of A is smaller than, less than the opposite of B. Okay, so let's see if that makes sense. If I have a positive number that is bigger than another positive number, its opposite is going to be less than the opposite. I guess that makes sense, because the bigger my number gets on the positive side, that means it's going to be far, far, far away from 0 on the negative side, but that's going to make that part smaller. So the bigger it is on the positive side, the smaller it is on the negative side, because both of them are so far away from 0. Okay, number 3, which day had the warmest temperature? This is asking you to look back at page 890 that you should have watched the video on. So if I look back quickly at that chart, it tells me that Monday is 3 degrees, Tuesday is -6 degrees, Wednesday is 5 degrees, Thursday is 1 degree, and Friday is -5 degrees. So right away, I know that the negative numbers are definitely colder than the positive numbers. So I can forget about those negative numbers. If I'm looking for the warmest temperature, the biggest number there. So I have 3 choices left. I have Monday, which is 3 degrees. I have Wednesday, which is 5 degrees. And I have Thursday, which is 1 degree. So definitely the warmest temperature there is Wednesday, because that's 5 degrees. That's the biggest positive number on any of those chart choices. So the biggest positive number is going to be the warmest temperature, because temperature gets warmer as it goes up. Okay, now we're going to go into no more word questions, just regular comparisons. So I want to use my number line, think about the further this way is bigger, the further that way is smaller, and do some comparison here. So first I'm looking at +7, -12. Obviously, if I have a positive and a negative, the positive number is going to be bigger. So that's easy. Alligator facing the 7, it is greater than. -3 and -9. Here's -3. Here's -9. I'm going that way. So that tells me -9 is much less than 0. -9 is the smaller number. So that's what I mentioned before. If I just look at the number part of this, 9 is bigger than 3. But because they're both negative, that means that 9 is further back from 0. So 9 is smaller on the negative side. So -3 is greater than -9. It's closer to the 0. Number 6, I have -8 and 0. Oh, well, that's easy. A negative number is always less than 0. That's what makes it negative. That means I've gotten down to nothing, and then I've gone further backwards. And number 7, oh, now they've gotten tricky. If you remember yesterday, they introduced this with the parentheses. This means the opposite of -2. Okay, so what is the opposite of -2? It's just regular old 2. So now I'm comparing +2 to -2. And again, a positive number is always going to be greater than a negative number. So once I think about what that means, then it becomes easier. Okay, and these last few problems ask me to go one step further. Instead of just comparing two numbers, now I'm going to put numbers in order from least to greatest. Again, if I'm using the number line, that should not be hard, because if I'm going from least to greatest, it means I'm just starting over on the left and going in this direction. I know the negative numbers are definitely going to be smaller than the positive ones. So I'm looking at -6 and -7. -7 is the furthest over here. So I'm going to put -7 as my least number. Then I get to -6. And then all the way over here is +5. That's definitely the biggest of the three because it's positive. It's on the other side of 0. If I go to number 9, once again, I'm going from least to greatest. So I have -6 and -2. -6 is the furthest to the left. So that is the least. It is the smallest number. Then -2. And then 8 way over here on the positive side. That is the biggest of the three. Oh, here's another one of these. Okay, now I need to stop and think, what does this mean? The opposite of -15. Well, that would be +15. Okay, so that's definitely not the smallest. I have -12 here and -21. That did not fit on my number line, but I can keep using my pattern here. If I'm going -10, -12 would be about here, -21 would be way over by my doorway. So definitely -21 is going to be furthest to the left the way we're counting. Then -12. -15 would have been in here. It would have been smaller than -12. But because this was the opposite, it was +15. That's way over here in my closet. So that's the greatest of the three. Oh, now I got to do 4 numbers in a row. Same idea, shouldn't be any harder. My negatives are -3 and -19. Well, here's -3. -19 would be way to the left of that. I would have to keep counting. So that's definitely my smallest. And then -3. Then I have 2 positive numbers, 3 and 11. Obviously, here's 3, and we all know that 11 is bigger. These are just regular counting numbers now. 11 would be here. So that would be the greatest of the 4. Okay, so there's some more practice working with integers, positive and negative numbers. Use your number line to help you remember the pattern and compare them and put them in order. And remember, when you see these tricky ones with the parentheses, that just means you're changing the sign. You're going to leave the number part the same. If it was negative, now it's not going to be negative. If it was positive, now it's going to be negative. Okay. Now, today's lesson and this chapter is a little bit different in that there are no homework pages, if you haven't noticed that yet. So you have no practice buddy to do. What you need to do is very carefully complete the rest of this page, 891 and 892, and make sure if you have any questions, you save them and you bring them up the next time you meet with your teacher live, so that you can be sure that you understand these really important 6th grade topics and get familiar with them before the end of the school year and your voyage off to middle school. So have a great rest of the day, and I will see you in a couple more lessons.